The question still remains, though, today, are farm killings blatant criminality or a ripple effect of the inequality in the sector, especially when it comes to land ownership, as an example? Let's look at farm killings from a perspective of black farmers now. Farm murders often stem from disputes over wages and claims of unfair treatment from farm employers. But let's bring into our conversation, in terms of the farmer tax feature in this hour, Siyabonga Sithole, who is the land rights coordinator for the Association for Rural Advancement. Siyabonga, good afternoon, welcome. You work as an organization in rural South Africa supporting farm dwellers. And we understand even from statistics all the time, including those that were issued earlier this year in May by Guido, the Minister of Police, when there's farm attacks, for example, some of the people who get killed are farm dwellers. How bad is the situation of farm attacks? From your perspective, what are you finding out on the ground from those black farm dwellers?
Thank you, Mr. Simulane. I think I agree with the notion that it is pure criminality. But having said that, you can't not look at the history and the cause of why this happens in farming communities. It is true that whether it's the farmer himself or herself or it's farm dwellers on the farm, they are all victims in different circumstances. But for me, what we are experiencing on the ground is the persistence of a lack of a relationship between farm dwellers and landowners. Because of the history, because of the contrast in how they exist on the same land. They exist with different access to resources. They exist with different access to services. We know that in the main, people living in farming communities are largely unemployed. And we know that the significant portion of farmers would have better access to resources. And without these two parties having an amicable relationship, it's a situation that is ripe for conflict. We often see finger pointing. When something happens on the farm, it is often those that live on the farm that are accused of wrongdoing. And there are assumptions made.
Yeah, there are assumptions made. Continue.
Yes, there are assumptions made by each party of the other party. So if you see a farmer that is in business on a farm, you assume wealth. You assume that they are wealth and they're living in opulence. And if you see people living in poverty, you assume that they would be suspect if there's something wrong that has happened or criminality on the farm. So for us, there's a need for facilitating a relationship so that there's a better understanding between the two parties. And yes, your initial question is about what is happening on the ground. We are seeing that there are attacks on farm dwellers as well as there are attacks on farm owners. So it is criminality on both sides, and which needs to be looked at. So for me, it's the history, the causation that needs to be.
Okay, Guido, I hope you're still with us. I don't know if you heard Siyabonga Sithole there. He's saying the relationship needs to be addressed between the farm dwellers, farm employees, and the owners because of the history of the country, which we can't deny. I mean, it's only just 27 years ago that we were all allowed to vote in this country as black people. So there's a tension there. Is a sense among your members, Afriforum, when you're discussing the issue of protection and safety and security on the farms, also touches on the lack of a meaningful, let's call it that, substantive relationship that everybody can work together on the farms, not point fingers at each other each time there's been an attack?
Yeah, so what we do is we actively encourage farmers and owners of farms and smallholdings to build good relationships with those working on their farms and those staying on their farms. Because I'm not exactly sure of percentages, but we know of cases where farm workers have either been forced to cooperate with criminals in terms of giving information to them on the farmer's whereabouts or where certain items would be found in the farmhouse. We also believe that those same farm workers could actually, form a good relationship with the farmer and actually help each other protect that farm.
Is it happening? Is it happening? Are they doing it?
I know of quite large-scale farms where it's actively taking place, but I'm pretty sure I don't get to visit that many farms, unfortunately, but I'm also sure that there's farms where there's lots of room for improvement.
Yeah. Is there a recognition among some of your members then, people who are supporting as Afriforum in the farming community, that history could play a part here, while, as you said yourself and Siyabonga said, the majority of these attacks on the farms are criminally driven. They are largely criminal. We can't ignore the fact there's a bit of a history there. Is a little bit an awareness of that historic fact among some of your members that you are representing?
I'd say that there's definitely an awareness of that history. Where I wouldn't necessarily agree is that history leads to the incidents of crime that are taking place on farms. And the reason I'm saying that is because we're seeing these attacks taking place, and regardless of whether they are farm workers or farmers being hurt or killed in those attacks, they generally seem to go for very sort of low-range, low-key items that they're stealing and taking away from those farms. So if there is a connection to that history and perhaps to the ownership of the farm, we're not really seeing it in the evidence presented to us.
So you don't think apartheid legacy is playing a role today in some of the farming communities?
From what I've seen, it doesn't seem to be the main motivation for these attacks. In instances where extreme torture has taken place, we have wondered out loud whether there was a secondary motive, or perhaps the fact that you've got opportunity because you're so far away, or the victims are so far away from help, that you can now enact or vent your anger towards the inhabitants of that farm because of the history and because of what happened in the past.
Okay. Siyabonga, apartheid legacy, your view, you've mentioned history. I mean, Guido is saying that it's largely criminality driven. Yes, there is a past, and the Afriforum in its own way as a lobby group and working with those people it's supporting to protect themselves and keep themselves safe is having an awareness campaign for people to build better relationships between farm dwellers, employees and owners of farms where they are racially diverse.
Yes. Tulane, I think for me, where I disagree with Guido, I hear him, but where I disagree is trying to ignore our past. That you can't do. Farming communities are a mere microcosm of what our country is. We know where we are in terms of social cohesion in this country. So the race issue we can't run away from. Farming communities are experiencing what they're experiencing because of the inequality that exists between those that coexist on the same land. You can't deny that. I'm not saying that anecdotally there are acts of that are of criminality that are not related, but in the main, what we are seeing, I've just gone through videos of communities that are angry. There is no trust between farm dwellers and farm owners. That's what we need to work on.
How do you build that trust? We have such a big, heavy shadow of a legacy called apartheid that we're still dealing with in different sectors of our lives. That's a given. How do we begin to build that trust, Siyabonga? What do you think?
I think also where you need to begin is with government itself and with our judiciary and our justice system. That needs to be fair. That needs to be have equality. That needs to be transparent. We have received complaints, and there's a number of cases that we're working on where people just feel that cases are not being dealt with in the courts in the same way. So when depending on who is the suspect, there's a different process that is followed. And in terms of transparency, we know that all the maxim around justice not just having to be done, but having to be seen to be done. And people are not happy with how cases that they report in courts are being handled. And that's the starting point, that the justice system needs to be fair and treat people equally.
What's your view, Guido? Yeah, thanks, Siyabonga. Sorry to cut in there. What's your view on the justice issue? I mean, Siyabonga saying the people on the ground, because I mean, they work. His association works with black farm dwellers in rural South Africa, and they feel that when it comes to justice, it is not fair to them, and it's not seen to be done, and it's therefore unfairly favors those who might have the resources to use the system in court. What's your view, Guido?
Look, I'm not an expert on that matter, but I'd say that across the board, South Africans are disappointed to a certain degree in the judicial system, whether that is because of a lack of resources or otherwise. So, yeah, I'm not entirely sure whether the matter is connected to the attacks and murders.
Yeah, but when it comes to farm attacks and farm murders, do you think the courts and the judicial system are dealing with? We have this court case now happening in the Piet Retief Magistrate Court in Mkondo. There are a couple of other cases, and two of the suspects, or of the people, or the accused, let me call it that, because now they've been arrested, they're no longer suspects. Two of the accused in the dock are linked to another case of the Koga brothers as well in Mpumalanga. Your view, I mean, your sense of it, watching from far, do you think this is how the justice system should operate?
Well, I'd almost say that in that specific case, the justice system operated quite quickly because the suspects were quite quickly identified and apprehended, and there are very different narratives. But I know of very many cases where suspects are either never arrested or it takes years and then they escape again. We have a whole team that supports victims of these vicious crimes on farms and murders, and they often spend years with these families whilst they're going through the court processes. Yeah. So if you're asking me whether I'm disappointed in the justice system, then yes, I am. Should it be sped up? Yes, it should. But at the same time, there are certain processes that they need to go through to make sure that they do establish exactly what happened, and so that guilty people can be convicted for their crimes.
Yeah, I mean, after all, constitutionally, we're all equal before the law. None of us are above the law. So besides the speed with which it must be handled, there's also the question of fairness. Before I let you go, Guido, because I'm going to be continuing this discussion with Siyabonga as well. We're going to be talking on the commercial side soon with Agri SA. But I just want to give you some time, Guido, just your parting thoughts. Siyabonga was talking about the building of trust in terms of relationships. You as Afriforum, you said you've got a campaign of creating awareness among your members to work harder at building relationships with their employees and the farm dwellers in their communities. What else do you think the country would need to do for us to begin to make a dent against farm killings and farm attacks?
Apart from communities organizing themselves and safety structures, that's a very good question. I think it's a very complex question because we believe that a lot of this crime is caused by the socioeconomic circumstances. Now, if I were to look at a rural community, say in I believe it was Lichtenburg or Leidenburg, where a big cheese factory is being closed down, and that's a local economy that's suffering tremendously from the failure of local government, and that's going to cause unemployment, and that eventually is at some stage going to cause additional criminality as well. So I'm struggling to give you a short answer.
No.
However, in the campaign that we've launched, where we're inviting farmers to allow us onto their farms and to allow us to organize themselves into these safety structures, we're actively trying to convince them to also allow farm workers to be part of safety plans and safety planning, and to also vent their concerns in terms of their safety where they are staying.
Okay, now I think you make a point, in my view, about addressing the socio-economic problems and local governance issues. Thank you very much.